To bail out the big three or not to bail out the big three, that's the topic of our program here on Ron Whitlock Reports. Welcome. Glad to have you join us on the program. Our guest to talk in terms of that and should the politicians pony up with the billions of dollars, Dr. Tom Coyle, who is a maquiladora expert in particular and teaches as a professor at the University of Texas. Tom, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
And welcome to the program, Jim Tipton. Thank you for joining us. President of Tipton Ford, fourth-generation seller of Ford products in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Ron.
Let's kind of try to relate to the audience and tell them what's in it for them if the bailout loan is approved by the Congress. What could impact on them, their friends, their neighbors, their taxes on their home, if the economy kind of goes into a decline, because there are maquilas, obviously here, right across, all the way from here to El Paso, whether that be Matamoros, Reynosa, Juarez, Laredo. And if those people go into a decline, those jobs lost, they will not be spending money on this side of the border, on the Texas side.
Right.
Should they loan the money or should they not loan the money, Mr. Tom?
Well, I get the first question. The first answer is no, I don't think so.
Why not?
And the reason I don't think so is because technically I think you have to ask two questions. Number one, if you were to give these guys the $25 billion, which I think now is up to $50 billion as a request that they ask for, how does that affect the local consumer? What does that do for anybody? Why aren't they making cars really becomes the question, and that's because the economy has slowed down a little bit, okay? So giving them money, which perpetuates a problem that they have, seems to only complicate the problem and not necessarily address it. We actually have a mechanism in this country for taking care of companies when they run into trouble, and we call that Chapter 11 of the bankruptcy laws, which allows you to keep operating while you get yourself fixed and out of your cost problems. And the big three, particularly of U.S. manufacturers, have some serious cost problems.
Tom, having marketed automotive products, cars and trucks, all of my adult career in television and radio, I must tell you, I don't think these people are going to buy a new product from a manufacturer who's in bankruptcy. They're going to go to one that's not in bankruptcy. That's just my opinion. They're going to be hard pressed.
I would
Jim?
agree. I would agree, Ron. And I would say also that it's a very difficult decision to either loan the money or not to loan the money. But what we have to look at is a broader picture than just giving money to an auto manufacturer. The big three, as they're referred to, employ directly 350,000 people in this country, and when you take and expand that to their suppliers, their advertisers, their marketers, and their accountants, we're talking about nearly 4 million people connected directly or indirectly to the car business. So when one of the largest companies in the world, and that being General Motors, goes into bankruptcy, you're not just affecting those line operators and those business managers that showed up in Congress a few weeks ago to ask for money. You're talking about a couple of million people that will be affected downstream. And as ugly as a loan might sound to one of these companies, we're talking about probably the same amount of money we'd have to be giving in unemployment if we didn't go ahead and shore up this business.
Why is what I said so obvious to a marketer and to a seller of vehicles? Because warranty is everything with the 100,000-mile warranties, multi-year warranties. That's kind of why people buy vehicles today. On the assumption everybody's vehicle is basically just as good as anybody else's. I mean, they're pretty well in the same vein in that particular regard, but that warranty is just kind of the end-all to car sales at this particular point in time. So why would someone not want to buy a product from Ford, General Motors, or Chrysler if they're in warranty because they don't know for sure that warranty is going to be backed up?
That's a very good point. I would not go buy a product if the company were in bankruptcy, same as what you've mentioned. Doctor here talked about bankruptcy being a good option for General Motors in particular. They'll be the first one to do so. What that would look like in a restructuring is they would be allowed then to renegotiate with the union. They'd be able to talk about their long-term debt. They'd be able to restructure some of their costs. And I'm not sure that the American people would be willing and ready to buy one of those automobiles during that process. So during that process, you've got a third of the domestic auto workers and their subsidiaries and their suppliers all in limbo waiting to see what that bankruptcy would look like. And I don't think our country's ready for that.
Well, Dr. Coyle, who is opposed to the bailout for the Big Three in Detroit, the lawmakers, being the two senators, U.S. senators for the state of Texas, Cornyn and Hutchinson, both are somewhat opposed to it, unless, point of Cornyn at least, unless the labor unions, which is the base of the Democratic Party, get some kind of major concessions more quickly than they've already committed to over the next 4-year period to try and get their wages back in line and try to get some of these legacy costs out of the way. Now, some of those things, if those things could be accomplished without having to go to bankruptcy, would you be willing to move into a position of being in favor of the bailout as opposed to your opposition position currently?
I don't think so, and here's why. The federal government has enough problems of its own to take care of right now. And the group of congressmen and senators that we have, and as we were speaking earlier, Jim, I can only think of the words of Mark Twain when he was trying to describe the Congress, and he said, suppose I were an idiot, and suppose I were a member of Congress, but wait, I repeat myself. This is the same group since 1950 that has run up a $10 trillion debt. And to listen to some of these folks try and explain to car company executives how you're supposed to run your business makes me just more than a little nervous. Now, I can't comment from the marketing perspective because you guys know that much better than I do. When I said I was opposed to a bailout, I was thinking much more in terms of, if you remember, when Delco was spun off from GM and they became Delphi, one of the first things they did was they said, well, we can't bear these kind of costs, and they went into bankruptcy. Now, they continued to work. Now, they're not a primary seller to the customer, but there was virtually no disruption anywhere in any of those factories. They simply restructured and went on. I'm much more of a guy that thinks that the market does best when the market's left alone and when governments start trying to interfere, because this is not going to be, okay, we trust you, Ford and General Motors and Chrysler. Here's the money. Go out and really, do good for the country. There's going to be so many strings attached to this thing. It bothers me anytime the government shows up.
Can I reply to that?
Please.
What I heard just now was about the government interfering with this process. Well, the government's already interfered with this process, and I think what really needs to happen with the domestics is that what they're asking for is to be allowed to work on a level playing field. And when I talk about a level playing field, I'm talking about when the domestic manufacturers are required to pay a union wage, and when they're required to pay the pension of the union worker till death, and all the other legacy costs they have when the foreign import companies are brought into this country, and they're given incentive packages by different states, and they're given incentive packages by local communities in non-union states such as Texas, Alabama, and Georgia, Tennessee. That puts them, the domestic three, at a distinct disadvantage. So right now we're talking about nearly a $4,000 legacy cost on every automobile manufactured in the United States by one of the domestic three. So they start out at a $4,000 disadvantage as every vehicle that's produced. What the big three are talking about, I hope, when they get to Washington, is they're talking about asking Congress to level the playing field. And when we're talking about doing that, we're forcing a level playing field if we go into bankruptcy. We're talking about breaking the unions, and I don't think President Obama was elected to do that. So I think what's going to happen is President Obama is going to take a look real hard at this incentive package that's allowed. And if he's as smart as a man as everyone seems to think he is, he's going to tie some job incentives to this money. And I would be in favor of that. I personally...
It brings in handling healthcare, universal health care, to take that cost away from
exactly.
the
Well, in Japan, all the health care costs are paid for by the government. They already have that. In Japan, the pensions are paid for by the government. They already have that. So the domestic auto manufacturers are rowing a boat with an anchor dragging behind them when the Japanese and the other imports are allowed to sail freely on our water in our country. The other issue in regard to domestic versus foreign manufacturing is that the non-union states give them huge incentive bucks, just like they did in San Antonio. I imagine they got nearly $2 billion to move to San Antonio, and we're a right-to-work state without any unions. So the first $2 billion worth of their labor was free. Now, if this package includes that type of incentive to the domestic big three, I would think that the American people would be very interested in that type of a package. That keeps people in their homes, it keeps them buying their cars, and it levels the playing field for the domestic auto industry.
Over the last 40 or 50 years, the the federal government, which now wants to be the holder of the money, by the way, and the attacher of the strings, has already
the stock when they get some
Yes.
stock
Yeah.
also.
Possibility.
Could be a heck of a bargain if they buy all this
yeah.
stock at $1 a share.
Could be.
Could be. But these folks now have added all kinds of restrictions to U.S. manufacturers over the years. And a lot of times the foreign guys that come in don't have to have those same restrictions. And that's one of those instances where once the government starts trying to get involved in things in the market system, it starts to get messed up. Now, if you were to take the same thing and go around and start dumping the labor and benefits obligations on all other foreign manufacturers, or you put the same wages that you had to do, or you said, by the way, in order, if you guys are going to be here, you're now going to be part of NAFTA, so guess what, you're going to have to meet the same of import-export ratios that go into the vehicles. If you start putting all that stuff together, it starts to it would level the playing field, drive the cost of other cars up, of course, but maybe a better thing would be for the federal government to just go back and try and work on a $10 trillion deficit and let the car companies take care of themselves.
I would agree with that. One of the things that I wanted to add also, Ron, is that the foreign car manufacturers have 40% of the sales market in the United States. With the production that they have, they are only required to put 20% content from the United States in the form of parts into their vehicles, whereas in the United States it's an 80% content. So 80% of all domestic vehicles built in the United States have 80% content. And so what I'm saying is, for every factory worker at the factory, there are 7 parts workers in the United States associated with that one job for the parts, where the Japanese don't have that. They build their 80% product and parts that they bring into this country in a labor-intensive, lower-cost environment and just bring it in. So when I'm talking about getting to a level playing field, let's take the government and let them ask for that to be removed, and then let's talk to the unions and see if we can't get some negotiations there to get a level playing field, and then let's take the legacy costs off of the manufacturer. And again, that's part of what my solution would be if anyone asked me what I would do. Ford Motor Company is looking for $9 billion out of this 50 that's proposed. And what they're talking about right now is they don't need the money. They're probably, of the 3 manufacturers, they're the most liquid. They're talking about they may only need to use it in 2010. If they can make it to 2011, they won't use it at all. In fact, Ford President or CEO Alan Mulally announced it for the entire time. If Ford Motor Company took any of the government money, he would take $1 for a salary until that money was paid back or that money was used. In addition to that, they've frozen all of the 2009 and 2010 bonus money to any of the white-collar workers in the company, and they're making extreme efforts to go ahead and trim the fat. There's been a big issue raised about the compensation of those managers and their flight habits and so forth, but nothing was ever brought up about the $5 billion that Alan Mulally was able to save in production costs the first year that he became CEO of Ford Motor Company. So the public is not getting all the information, and that's typical of news media. They don't want everybody to have information. That's called knowledge, and that's not what they're in the business to do.
What I seem to be hearing is the Congress of the United States of America, then you look at the Democratic Party and their alliance to the union base of that party
Exactly.
through the years has made the auto industry non-competitive, while the foreign countries, China investing in their automotive works, Korea investing in their automotive works, foreign manufacturers getting involved as a country in their product to create job opportunities, then providing as a national basis health care, as happens in China and Canada rather, where the big 3 going to Canada in order to get health care handled, not as a legacy, as part of the cost of the vehicle, but handled in Canada, then coming to Mexico where they have the same situation. It seems like the auto industry has had its hands tied behind its back by the U.S. Congress, and it's time for the U.S. Congress to come up and pay the piper for having made its own industry non-competitive.
My point exactly.
Can't argue.
Then, Tom, how can you still be opposed to the bailout?
Oh, because what I'd really like to do is for the Congress to simply just get out of business. They don't know anything about it.
Well,
weren't you paying attention to the idiot part?
What would make sense? What would make sense, Ron, is that they would go ahead and allow General Motors to go into bankruptcy, and it might happen. indicated that they're burning through cash at a rate fast enough to go ahead and need bankruptcy protection by the end of 2008.
You're smiling because Ford's got enough money to stay in business through 2011. That's why you're smiling.
I'm smiling because they got a lot of loans before it was difficult to get loans. So they're not actually in a positive liquid position or of equity. They've got a lot to pay back, and that's the other thing about letting a company go bankrupt.
Isn't it true that if somebody's going to go bankrupt, it's going to be General Motors first?
Well, they'll have to
Ford
go first.
will be way down the line.
They'll have to go first, and we don't know about Chrysler because, again, they're a private company. We don't know what their books look like. Mm-hmm. But if a company that owes as much as General Motors, with the population of employees they have and the suppliers down the line, were to go bankrupt for an extended period of time, we'd be talking about an extensive amount of layoff, and that's how it would affect the local economy. There are a lot of local parts suppliers across the river, and there are a lot of domestic employees here working for General Motors dealerships, and they would all be affected negatively by word of mouth, by people losing their jobs, their homes, fewer people in the restaurants and at the Walmarts and et cetera. It goes all the way down the line, so it's not a good situation.
What would happen to our audience driving one of the big three products if their vehicle manufacturer went into bankruptcy? Is there a possibility their warranty would be null and void and they wouldn't be able to even get parts?
No, I don't think that's true, Ron. I think the doctor said it on break. He said what we're talking about is worst case scenario. If General Motors goes into bankruptcy, they're going to be talking about reorganizing, not going out of business. And I don't think any of the big three will be going out of business. A couple of them are for sale anyway. You brought up an interesting point about the government buying stock in a company. That's not actually a bad idea. It's very common in Europe for governments to buy stock in companies to support that company. And as you mentioned earlier, if our country could get Ford at $1.79 or General Motors at $4, and we were to come through this by the year 2011 or 2012, and the stock had doubled or tripled, it wouldn't be a bailout at all. It'd be a profit if those stocks were sold during that period of time. So. It's a very interesting business case that we're looking at right now. This is water that we've never tread in any place. We've never been in this water before. But I know that the American people and the American public has confidence. We know that the product is good. We know that the quality gap has come very close to being non-existent between the domestic and the foreign auto manufacturers. And the American public needs to know that, and they'll start to feel that domestic pride, and we'll see that by 2011.
Now, Texas and northern Mexico has a lot at stake in what's going on in the nation's capital over the big three being bailed out, because quite a bit of auto manufacturing going on in the Lone Star State. General Motors has a plant at Arlington. In San Antonio, Toyota's and 21 on-site suppliers are manufacturing ton of trucks. General Motors and Chrysler's in Monterrey and Saltillo, Mexico, in that area. Also, the state of Tamaulipas with all of our maquilas, suppliers, manufacturing parts. And also, General Motors planning to build a San Luis Potosi plant coming online in 2010. What does the impact of all this have as it relates to the maquiladoras, where you have so much experience, Tom?
Well, I think what you're going to find that's going to happen, I've been checking with some of my maquila friends over the last 48 hours. We've been talking about this quite a bit. And
Tengo miedo? Any miedo?
Do what?
Are they scared?
Oh yeah. Well, actually, scared is not an appropriate thing. I think they're all concerned. Yeah, but I think they've all resolved themselves that relative to the automotive sector, that next year's just plain going to be a tough year. Bailout, no bailout is not an issue at that point, because until the American consumer starts, or till the consumption of cars goes up, they're simply going to be in a slowdown or a hold or a reduction mode. Now, for the folks along the river, particularly from Brownsville to McAllen, it's not an insignificant to do. If you just consider Delphi by themselves, Delphi is the largest maquila employer in Mexico. And in the lower Rio Grande Valley, Matamoros and Reynosa, they have over 9,000 employees. So if there is and I don't want anybody to get too upset because I'm about to speculate, so let's don't do them too bad. But if there's a slowdown that were to result in like a 10% reduction in force, that in most places would be like closing an entire plant. I mean, you'd be talking about 900 or 1,000 folks. And there is a huge spillover that comes to the U.S. side. I mean, Most
Because
big
those
time.
killer workers come to the United States to
I'm
buy.
sure that most folks that have ever been to Sam's or Walmart on a Saturday have to stop and wonder, wait a minute, did I cross the bridge?
Ron,
An
I like
awful lot of Tamaulipas tags.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that also. That we're in 2008 and we've got 2008 expenses, but yet the domestic auto manufacturers and even the import manufacturers are selling into a market right now that is as slow as it's been in 17 years. So we've got 1992 sales and 2008 expenses, and the only way we're going to be able to balance our balance sheets as a company is we're going to have to look at our costs, and our major costs in our business is the employee. So I know from a personal standpoint I've already reduced about 10%, and I think most of my friends have already experienced the same sort of setback at a minimum of 10% in their businesses, and this will have a ripple effect.
What can Texas do, fellas, to try and tap into what's going on in Alabama? Because in Alabama they got Honda, Hyundai, Navistar, Toyota, Mercedes-Benz all moving into Alabama. Texas hadn't done too bad. General Motors up in Arlington and Toyota in San Antonio, and then the Maquilas. But what can we do better than we're not doing now?
Those companies all came and they did look at Texas, and they did look at Louisiana, and they did look at Georgia, and they looked at Florida, and the state of Alabama was the one that was willing to give them the largest incentive, the incentive that I talked about earlier.
Now, some of the car dealers in the Rio Grande Valley of South Texas have cut back on sales staffs and trimmed where they can trim. We did talk to Frank Bogus, who's the head of Bogus Ford sales in McAllen and Harlingen. He's the patron grande, so to speak, of both of those dealerships, and he says they're not cutting back on personnel of any kind. They're going to handle any kind of slowdown through attrition. He did say that his father, Louis Bogus, indicated that the last time their dealerships went through any kind of a problem of this magnitude that could happen, that would be the Great Depression, that they were the last in the country to go into a depression nationally and the first to come out. So even back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, Rio Grande Valley, South Texas, by virtue of the proximity to Mexico, was the last to feel it and the first to come out of it. So we can feel pretty good about living in this general area of the world.
That's been our experience also, Ron. And my dad and I had a discussion the other day, and we don't remember when the business was like this. We had the peso devaluation of the 80s, and that was pretty drastic. But we all felt comfortable at that time that Mexico's peso was in trouble, but the United States dollar was not. This point in time, we've got both economies around, and not just both, but we have all the countries around the world all suffering all at the same time. This is a perfect storm.
Dr. Tom,
Huh?
thank you for coming.
You bet.
joining us.
Thank you.
Ron, thank you.
Tipton,
Yes.
thank you for coming
Appreciate
to
it.
be with us.
Yep.
Thank you for tuning in. Till next time, adios.